behavioral studies and genetics programs with the anacondas, as well as many husbandry studies with them. Work with many other crocodilians. The Siamese crocodile, I've done a lot of work with them. The Tomistomas, been involved with them intimately for a long time. Certainly many of the New World crocs, the Orinoco's, the broad-nosed caimans, and the Melanasuchus, the black caimans. They are in need of a lot of study because I think that we have lost the dynamics of their populations. It looks like years ago when they would live in huge groups that was necessary for correct socialization. We knocked their populations down so far that they live very differently than they used to. I have a small clip of old footage from the 1930s that in this single oxbow area in a Brazilian river we can count over 300 black caiman. That's pretty incredible. Nowadays they talk about the numbers per kilometer of black caiman, and it's, 1 or 2 or 3 in the areas where they're still surviving and doing reasonably well. But again, have we done and changed what the black caiman is by knocking those populations down so far? Man has a habit of going in and changing things, destroying things ignorantly, and then doesn't have the technology. We've got the destructive technology, but we've got nothing to bring anything back. Our destructive technology is phenomenal. We can blow up the planet 1,000 times over, no problem. When it comes to putting a single flower back on a plant that we might have knocked off, we can't do it. And it's kind of a sad commentary on what direction our technology has taken. The Chinese alligator situation is a very difficult one in terms of conservation. The Chinese are a very old culture. They are not particularly enthusiastic about taking outside help, and in many cases justifiably so. Americans especially are fond of taking America with them wherever they go, and they take a great superiority complex. The Chinese culture has been around a lot longer than any cultures here in the United States or even the European cultures. And they, at least in some instances, have justification for their feeling that they should be accorded at least a little bit of respect for that. Myself and my associate have had particularly good luck with the Chinese by the approach being cultural rather than professional initially. And with that approach, we were able to get the Chinese officials in a situation where they considered us to be more than just colleagues, but true friends. It opened many doors and was the genesis for what was to be a very remarkable project, the first of its kind in China, where we were going to be catching up all of the remaining wild Chinese alligators one at a time, doing the morphometric studies, doing the DNA work, taking samples, doing many, many different things, even taking photos of the habitats, trying to do silt work to see if we were getting pesticide buildups. So it was a multi-pronged situation. We wanted to find out, most importantly, what was still left of the Chinese alligator population, without a doubt fewer than 100 in the wild, and find out what kind of genetic diversity we had within that population. Were these highly related animals, or did we still have some of the truly rare alleles left out there? That project, unfortunately, was truncated with this horrendous incursion into my facilities up north and ripping me literally right out of my conservation mode, and probably, at least for the time being, if not forever, from what I did and wanted to continue to do, although I am still raising funds for my associate who has just gone over there, Mr. Abeni. He's going to try to continue the project as best he can. With regard to Chinese alligator breeding, here at the Conservancy, they were very, very, very close to a really substantial breeding project with the Chinese alligators, and pretty careful stud book work to go with it. The pairs were all broken up by the devastating raid that occurred up in Milwaukee. One of the problems with Chinese alligators is the introduction of the animals. for years, people have been putting Chinese alligators together and then coming back the next day and finding, or sometimes the next week, finding 1 or 2 dead alligators. The introduction is very complex with Chinese alligators. They have a really strange social structure that we do not fully understand. By the time we started studying the Chinese alligators, in fact, their social structure in the wild was gone, no longer existed. So we really don't know what true social structure is in the Chinese alligator. I spent a number of years trying to work on methods of introduction between males and females, and feel that I finally had worked out most of the kinks in that. It's still pretty laborious, but we could do it successfully almost all the time. However, there still remained the problem of selection. The females are very selective about who they will breed with, and only about 1 in 3 or 4 pairings is actually okay. Even if I get them to the point where they don't kill each other, often the female will not allow the male to breed her. So it's a matter of the gals being pretty persnickety about who they're going to associate with. And it requires a lot of labor, and it requires a great deal of time. The animals on the farms over in China are, for the most part, very highly related animals. So even though they have several thousand on the farms over there, the ones that would actually be worthwhile for reintroduction are very, very few, because we'd end up with a genetic bottleneck using most of those. They can donate to the Dragonwood Conservancy, P.O. Box 878, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or 28035 Hosea Lane in Eustis, Florida. That would be 32736, or in Milwaukee, 53201. It's badly in need of funding. I went out and did program after program after program, and that's how we were funding the research work and ongoing work that we were doing. I did educational programs everywhere from schools to expos to private zoos to clubs, nature groups, nature centers, horticultural domes, anywhere you can imagine. With regard to the first question, how many facilities, private or public, could handle large groups of crocodilians? Almost none, as these absolutely categorically arrogant people from Matic are finding out with their AZA penchant, thinking that absolutely no one but them should be dealing with these animals. That's just absolutely farcical. I'm sorry, but there are wonderful institutions out there that are not AZA. There are both good and bad AZA institutions, as there are with many, many things. And with regard to who could handle these animals in any kinds of large groups, there's almost nothing out there, or no other group that can. The group of animals that I moved were moved in an emergency situation, and were housed temporarily in a building that had been, for the most part, abandoned. How it would be damaged by what's gone on, well, it's crushed, just as they've crushed me. And now they're in a position where they can't afford to backpedal on it because of what they will look like. You have everyone from a city attorney, assistant city attorney, to people on down who made absolutely horrific remarks about me without ever understanding what was going on or finding out anything. You had a group of enforcement officers who were unlike anything I've ever heard or seen, other than perhaps something from 1938 Germany. And that's not my comment. That was actually a comment by a federal officer who I had in there looking at the situation. This was a catastrophic blow to me, and without trying to be arrogant, I think a pretty heavy hit to crocodilian conservation. As far as the types of animals that I had animals that were missing limbs. I had animals that had had terrible infections, animals that had lead poisoning, cadmium poisoning, animals that had been kept in absolutely tiny containers for decades and then given to me. I had animals that had been starved. I had animals that were going into almost cachexial inanition, where there was nothing left on the animal at all. If you fed them, they couldn't process the food properly because they'd been in that condition for so long. And in most instances, we brought them back, at least to a state where they could have been bred at some point in time or another. I started the croc school that became known as the AZA Crocodilian School. I decided to turn it over to the AZA when I was part of the Crocodile Advisory Group, and I'm not sure that that was the smartest thing I ever did. I conceptualized the school. I got it started, got it going at one of the CAG meetings, Crocodile Advisory Group meetings, and by the way, that is all AZA. And it got off pretty well on the right foot, I think. And ironically, 2 years later, I was asked to leave the school for comments that I made during a catching episode of an alligator at the St. Augustine Alligator Farm. And the irony again is I never made those comments. It was actually someone standing next to me who happened to be from the Bronx Zoo who made those comments. Had nothing to do with me. As a matter of fact, I'm not saying I disagreed with the comments or agreed with them. I'm not going to make any judgment calls there. But it wasn't even me who did it. It was just one more way for, I think, folks who were uncomfortable with having someone who was non-AZA participating in their programs. You asked about sexing of crocodilians. Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's difficult. It always involves probing within the cloaca to feel for the penis in the male and, of course, the clitoris in the female. It's a Latin derivation, so we look at the second syllable for emphasis. But at any rate, it is a serious problem in some species of crocodilians. The black caiman, the tomistoma, the gharial are all very difficult animals to sex. And there are certain things that you need to know about them. Even the Chinese alligator, we received 3 Chinese alligators from a facility, about 2 or 3 years ago, and every last one of them was missexed. And they're relatively easy to sex. The tomistomas are very difficult to sex, more so than probably any other crocodilian. And it's in the male, but sometimes it's very flaccid. The female, on the other hand, certain times of the year, the clitoris is very engorged and very firm. So it's very easy to get switches on the sexing of the male and female tomistomas until they get to such a size where there's no question about it being a male or a female. Although I have one female that everyone swore was a male. I kept telling them it was a female, and when she started producing eggs, I rested my case. With regard to black caimans, they are very difficult to sex until they are pretty good sized. You just can't feel much of anything within the black caimans until they are at a certain level, and they are also seasonal, not the same as tomistomas, but somewhat similar. There are seasonal changes in the sex organs. I think after what has happened to me, I would probably discourage anyone from getting involved in crocodilians at this point in time. Until we see a change in attitude within our culture, until we see a change in the type of enforcement that goes on, until we see a change in regulations that are absolutely draconian, that have no business existing in the real world, that are not protecting animals, they're protecting them into extinction. There's no forethought behind these regulations. These are just reactionary things that people do. It's like this ridiculous Burmese python situation in the Everglades, where everyone has jumped on the bandwagon, this horrible thing, this, that, and the other thing. If we were as afraid of automobiles as we are of Burmese pythons, we'd have fewer accidents. Far more people are killed in a day than are killed by Burmese pythons in centuries. And that's by automobiles. Do we ban automobiles? No. Burmese pythons, as far as we can tell, in their home range, have never killed a human being. There is no record of a human being ever being killed in their home range. Why would they come over to the United States and set up housekeeping and start killing people? It's a joke. It's a very bad joke. It's bad science. It's science fiction, not real science. It's junk science. Most everything that has supported these ideas comes from a couple of sources. One of them is this USGS survey, which, if those folks had been in any of the classes that I attended, they probably would have been failed pretty quickly with that report. And also the animal rights groups, who will do anything to gain more power over individuals and stop them from possessing animals. A very, very unhealthy situation, as I've stated before. We need to be more connected, not less connected with animals. And for anyone who says, oh, that can't happen, well, they just closed all the pet shops in San Francisco. It does happen, and it will happen. And it can happen to you tomorrow. This is a terrible situation that we have created. It truly is. It's a terrible climate that we have created in this country. And all in the name of good and wonderful. It's not good and wonderful. It's at best misguided and more properly very sick. I put this conservancy together pretty much single-handedly. I started work on it many years ago. The Cullen vivarium existed as of 1963. The Cullen Vivarium Wildlife Conservancy, which was the non-profit or not-for-profit organization, has existed for more than 16 years. It was the ultimate goal to produce a not-for-profit conservation organization out of other things that I was doing. Virtually everything I have ever earned in my lifetime has gone into conservation in one form or another. One of the reasons that I feel especially injured by these incredible characterizations of the people who did these raids up in Milwaukee, many of them who are 9 to 5 in a particular public institution. I've never been 9 to 5. I often spent 18 or 20 hours a day working when I had to create conservation situations, to work with animals, to create an environment where these animals could be cared for, especially animals that were not pretty enough for the zoos anymore, animals that had been abandoned, animals that had had problems, etc. I did just tons of pro bono work for various humane organizations and wildlife rehab organizations. Never charged anyone a penny for it. It all came out of what I raised or out of my pocket one way or another. I lived a very frugal lifestyle. And once again, to touch on this idea of animal hoarding, the next new buzzword that they're using on television for these pseudo-documentary programs that they're putting together. Truly a bad joke on the American public, again, with these sensationalistic things that they're throwing out there. Our educational climate with regard to animals has just, in my view, gone totally south. It's very unfortunate. At our facility here, or what used to be my facility here, I did everything from plan the plumbing to create and build the enclosures to engineer how this place was going to be put together, to pay for the property, to buy the electricity, to come up with a water plan, you name it. I did it. And I did it because I had a love for nature